From the blood-soaked fields of the French Wars of Religion to the tumultuous ravages of the 30 Years' War, Europe has long been a battleground of conflicting faiths, territories, and ambitions. The French Wars of Religion, wrought with fierce clashes between Catholics and Huguenots in the 16th century, left an indelible mark on France, etching the horrors of civil discord into its history. Simultaneously, the German Peasants War unfolded, where oppressed peasants rose in defiance against feudal oppression, only to be met with devastating suppression. Meanwhile, the Tudor Rebellions cast their own shadows over England, where power struggles tested the monarchy, forging resilience even amidst chaos. Across the sea, the Dutch revolt against Spanish rule signaled the rise of the Dutch Republic, marking a triumph for self-determination and a shift in the balance of power. Throughout these conflicts, the tales of ambition, resistance, and transformative change echo loudly in Europe's collective memory, painting a vivid picture of a continent forever shaped by war. These conflicts were not merely battles for territory or power, but profound struggles that redefined the very fabric of European society. The religious wars of the 16th and 17th centuries tore communities apart, pitting neighbor against neighbor in the name of faith. The Protestant Reformation had unleashed forces that monarchs and popes alike struggled to contain, leading to decades of bloodshed that would reshape the political and religious landscape of the continent. The French Wars of Religion stand as a testament to the destructive power of religious intolerance. Beginning in 1562, these conflicts saw the Catholic majority clash repeatedly with the Protestant Huguenot minority. The violence reached its horrific peak during the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre of 1572, when thousands of Huguenots were slaughtered in Paris and across France. The wars would drag on for nearly 4 decades, devastating the French economy and population before Henry IV's Edict of Nantes finally brought a fragile peace in 1598. Across the Rhine, the German Peasants' War of 1524 to 1525 represented one of the largest popular uprisings in European history. Inspired by the Reformation's challenge to traditional authority, peasants rose up against the oppressive feudal system that had bound them for centuries. They demanded freedom from serfdom, fair taxation, and the right to elect their own pastors. But the rebellion was brutally crushed by the nobility, with an estimated 100,000 peasants killed in the suppression. The failure of this revolt would delay social reform in Germany for generations. England's Tudor period was marked by its own religious and political upheavals. The break with Rome under Henry VIII set off a chain of rebellions and counter-rebellions as the country swung between Catholicism and Protestantism. The Pilgrimage of Grace in 1536, the Western Rebellion of 1549, and Wyatt's Rebellion in 1554 all challenged royal authority, testing the resilience of the Tudor monarchy. These conflicts forged a distinctly English form of Protestantism and strengthened the power of Parliament relative to the Crown. Meanwhile, the Dutch revolt against Spanish rule, beginning in 1566, would become one of the most successful independence movements in European history. The harsh rule of Philip II of Spain, combined with religious persecution of Protestants in the Low Countries, sparked a rebellion that would last 80 years. Led by William of Orange, the Dutch fought a grueling war of independence that saw the innovative use of water defenses, guerrilla tactics, and naval warfare. The eventual recognition of Dutch independence in 1648 marked the birth of a new republic and a major shift in the European balance of power. The 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648 stands as perhaps the most devastating conflict of this era. What began as a religious dispute in Bohemia escalated into a continent-wide catastrophe that drew in virtually every major European power. The war devastated Central Europe, with some regions losing up to half their population to violence, disease, and famine. The Peace of Westphalia that ended the war established principles of state sovereignty and religious tolerance that would shape European politics for centuries to come. These wars and rebellions left lasting legacies that echo through European history to the present day. They established the principle of religious tolerance, even if imperfectly applied, They demonstrated the power of popular resistance against tyranny. They reshaped borders and created new nations. And they taught Europe the terrible cost of religious and political extremism, lessons that would influence the development of Enlightenment thought and modern democratic principles. The impact of these conflicts extended far beyond the battlefield. The economic consequences were staggering. Trade routes were disrupted, cities were sacked, and agricultural production collapsed in war-torn regions. The 30 Years' War alone is estimated to have reduced the population of the Holy Roman Empire by between 25 and 40%. Entire villages were abandoned, and it would take generations for some regions to recover their pre-war population levels. The social fabric of Europe was fundamentally altered by these conflicts. The old feudal order, already weakening, was further undermined by the chaos of war. Peasants who had fought in armies returned home less willing to accept their traditional subservient roles. The merchant class grew in power and influence, financing wars and profiting from the reconstruction that followed. The concept of the nation-state began to emerge more clearly as people increasingly identified with their country rather than their local lord or their religious community. Religious tolerance, though still far from universal, began to take root as a practical necessity. The Peace of Augsburg in 1555 and later the Peace of Westphalia in 1648 established the principle that rulers could determine the religion of their territories, but also provided some protections for religious minorities. This was a revolutionary concept in an age when religious uniformity had been seen as essential to social order. The idea that people of different faiths could coexist peacefully within the same political entity would gradually gain acceptance, though it would take centuries for full religious freedom to be realized. The military innovations of this period would shape warfare for centuries to come. The Dutch developed new tactics and formations that made infantry more effective against cavalry. The Swedish king Gustavus Adolphus revolutionized artillery use and combined arms tactics during the 30 Years' War. The Spanish tercios, once dominant, were gradually superseded by more flexible military organizations. Naval warfare evolved rapidly, with the Dutch and English developing powerful fleets that could project power across oceans. These military developments were closely tied to advances in metallurgy, engineering, and logistics. The cultural and intellectual impact of these wars was equally profound. The horrors of religious conflict contributed to a growing skepticism about religious certainty and dogmatism. Thinkers like Michel de Montaigne questioned the wisdom of killing over theological disputes. The seeds of the Enlightenment were planted in the blood-soaked soil of the religious wars. The idea that reason and tolerance should guide human affairs, rather than religious fervor and blind obedience to authority, gained traction among educated Europeans. Art and literature of the period reflected the trauma of war. Paintings depicted the suffering of civilians, the destruction of cities, and the brutality of soldiers. Writers chronicled the chaos and questioned the purposes for which so much blood was shed. The memoirs and chronicles of this era provide vivid testimony to the human cost of these conflicts, reminding us that behind the grand narratives of kings and generals were millions of ordinary people whose lives were shattered by forces beyond their control. The legacy of these wars continues to resonate in modern Europe. The borders established by the Peace of Westphalia formed the basis for the modern state system. The principle of state sovereignty, though challenged and modified over the centuries, remains a cornerstone of international relations. The hard-won lessons about the dangers of religious extremism and the value of tolerance continue to inform European political culture. And the memory of the devastation wrought by these conflicts has contributed to Europe's commitment to peace and cooperation in the modern era, as embodied in institutions like the European Union. Understanding these wars and rebellions is essential to understanding modern Europe. They were the crucible in which many of the defining features of European civilization were forged. The balance between state power and individual liberty, the relationship between church and state, the rights of minorities, the rules of warfare, the concept of national identity, All of these were shaped by the conflicts of the early modern period. The blood and suffering of those centuries were not in vain if we learn from them and work to build a more just and peaceful world. As we reflect on these tumultuous centuries, we are reminded that the freedoms and stability we often take for granted today were hard-won through immense sacrifice and suffering. The story of early modern Europe is ultimately a story of human resilience, of the capacity to learn from tragedy, and of the slow, painful progress toward a more enlightened and humane civilization.